Around about 1 in 4 people who apply to join the Oslo Police Service are accepted. This makes it an easier trade to get into than, say, heart surgery, but harder than bricklaying. I'm not knocking bricklaying. We all need walls put up. I'm just saying that there are certain standards which need to be met before you get your badge. The training is pretty rigorous for starters. At the police university, you get drilled in criminology, psychology and sociology, as well as having to do a bunch of press-ups every day. There are the long hours in the shooting range, there are classes in conflict resolution, and you also learn how to handle a speedboat, which, if you're that way inclined, might get you transferred into the boat patrol. I was that way inclined, as it happened. I had grown up by the sea and could sail a boat before I could walk. Actually, that's ridiculous. I could probably draw a picture of a boat before I could walk. Or at the least I could say the word boat before I could walk. Either way, it's in the blood, is what I'm saying. And so even though I struggled a bit with the firing range and the conflict resolution and definitely the push-ups, I aced the speedboats, and now I spend my time patrolling the Oslofjord and have done for 10 years. My point is, to get into the Oslo Police Service, you need to be a particularly conscientious and dedicated individual. You need to have a range of skills and abilities. You need empathy, determination and clear thinking. But, at the very least, you need to be able to spell your name correctly on the application form. So, my little chick, be good for Granny, won't you? I've got to go and get on my boat and help keep the Oslofjord safe. Something you might want to do when you grow up too. It's in the blood. And it's also in the name, because you're a Strandhed. Like it or not. Well, I'm glad you asked me that. Strandhed is an ancient name with a proud history. It is from the German Strand, which means the shore, and head, which means health. The Strandheads would be responsible for the health of the shoreline. This is very different to stranded, which means abandoned and lost, and if anyone teases you about being stranded, then that's due to an administrative error which dates back to your mother missing off the H on the application form. And ever since then... Oh, yes. I've bored you with this many times. All I'm stressing is, neither of us are stranded, even though I'm leaving you to go to work. So you might feel a little bit... We're Strandheads, not Strandeds, and that means that Mummy has to go now and fish a body out of the water. No one thinks of Norway as a particularly warm country, but there are often tourists who arrive thinking it might be a bit like Scotland or Belgium or somewhere, and arrive a bit underdressed. But it gets so cold here that parts of the Oslofjord can freeze over. Usually this is okay. The fish, for example, swim deeper underneath the icy surface and so stay in the fluid water. My father told me that some Arctic fish can secrete antifreeze molecules to inhibit ice crystals in their body. This seems like a smart bit of biology. I use aquavit personally, but good for the fish, I say. Last night, however, the temperature dropped to -8, and in the morning a walker discovered that a shoal of pollock, probably chased into the exposed bay by a bigger fish, got trapped in the shallow tide and were frozen before they could escape. And there they stayed, hundreds of them, locked beneath the surface. This has happened a few times, mainly in the north of the country. But what marked this sight was that on the edge of this shoal, looking upwards, hands pressing against the ice like he was pressing against a pane of glass, was the body of a man.
Someone has checked that this ice is okay to walk on, right? Mikkel, have you been out here already? Because you're what, 12 stone? And I'm, Well, considerably less than that. I'm not back to my fighting weight, but even so, if you, as a man, a couple of stones heavier, or at least 3 stones heavier than me, You can't hear me, can you? Okay, fine.
So, the frozen man I'm looking at is about 5 feet 5 tall. He's in his 40s, I would think. Head clean shaven. He's wearing dark clothes, a V-neck jumper, black trousers, and a jacket where there's the suggestion of a uniform in the cut. If we're lucky, we'll find identification when we cut him out of the ice. His eyes are open and frozen white, and his mouth is open, like he's been shouting at the surface. The fish have swirled around him rather than keep clear, which suggests he must have been dead when he reached this part of the water, or else he would have frightened the fish away.
Whoa, okay. Mikkel! I'm coming back before I'm part of this... Is bouillabaisse the word I'm thinking of? Get the team out here. I don't want the victim drifting away when the ice melts.
There was something almost beautiful about the way the fish had arranged themselves around the body, like a swirling backdrop to the man's torment. But soon the body was chipped out of the ice and brought to the boorhus for the pathologist to look him over. There was no evidence of foul play, and the cause of death was drowning, quickened by the shock of the cold on entering the water. He had no documents on him, nothing in the pockets of his clothes, although the jacket he was wearing was familiar to me, but too generic to place immediately. Now free from the ice, our victim's expression had loosened into something more rested. But even on the slab, I still felt that I could see something of that cry I saw in the ice. Hi, Mum. How is he? Okay, well, he might be hungry. You could try giving him another bottle. I left one in the fridge. Right, well, I thought I'd left one in the fridge. Look, I won't be long. I'm just checking out the Red Cross to see if anyone who uses the shelter recognises him. Yes, I can hear him being grumpy. Perhaps he needs a sleep. Well, then perhaps he needs another one. There are about 3,000 homeless in the city, and most of them at some point can be found queuing up outside the Red Cross in the evening hoping for a bed. I'd had the autopsy photographer take a photograph that made the man as human and alive as possible, and that's what I showed some of the vagrants in the queue while Mikkel went inside. I drew a blank with the dozen at the front, but then a woman halfway back did recognise the man in the picture. The victim had visited the shelter before and was considered clever, cultured, but very restless, and so only appeared a handful of times. The woman didn't remember his name, and I continued down the line. As I got to the end, she called me back. Jakob, she thought. Jakob was his name.
The current must have carried Jakob south, which means we should follow the coast north, but since the pathologist doesn't believe he was in the water for hours before he was stopped by the ice, I don't think we need to check boats that were in the open sea. He thinks, based on calculations about how the tide and temperature was that night, we won't need to go further than Ekeberg.
We moored the boat in the docks, and Mikkel asked me what the plan was. I didn't really know. Mosseveien Road hugs the coast in Ekeberg, and there are many points on it where a man could have easy access to the water, so I suggested we walk down it. Mikkel had this expression on his face. Walk down it. That's your plan. I could see he was also thinking that since having a baby, my brain had become addled, and he wouldn't be the only one to think that. I could sense it in the office. I told him if he didn't want to cooperate, he could take the tram back to headquarters. So he did, and I walked the road alone. After about half an hour, it did indeed seem like a pointless exercise. What was I hoping to find? A note in the snow explaining the tragedy? A telltale pair of shoes on the shoreline? I gave up exploring the road and instead walked inland and up towards Campen Park, where at least it would be quieter. The sun was setting and the sky was turning orange, which suggested more snow. Perhaps I was just avoiding the time when I had to go back to my screaming baby. And it was at that thought that I remembered where I had seen the jacket.
Hello? I know you're closed, but can you let me in? I'm with the Oslo police. I want to ask you a few questions. I'm not a desperate art lover.
And there it was, in a room at the end of the gallery. I'm no expert, but I'd say it was probably Norway's best-known painting. I hadn't seen it for maybe 15 years, not in the flesh. It appears plenty on mugs or T-shirts or in cartoons, but it's quite something in the flesh. In the background is the bulge of Oslo, and the view from Ekeberg is still about the same if you block out the docks, the road to the coast, the railings, and the bald man in black with his hands up to his face, almost melting into the world in his despair. Jakob had sat in his art gallery attendant's jacket, day after day, watching people approach the painting. The gallery had Jakob's records on file, and back at the office, a few phone calls revealed a life not dissimilar to Edvard Munch's own. A sister who died young, childhood illness which lost him much schooling, so hadn't given him the job opportunities he might have liked, a history of depression. But without access to the transforming and comforting talent of Edvard Munch, Jakob had lost his fight with despair and taken himself into the water and frozen, just like a scream, in front of which he had sat for so many years. He had left a note in his locker, written in his hand, but not his words. I went along the road with two friends. The sun set, and suddenly the sky became blood, and I felt the breath of sadness. I leaned against the fence, clouds over the fjord. My friends went on, but I just stood trembling with an open wound in my breast as I heard a huge, extraordinary scream pass through nature.
Shh, little one. Mummy's back. Case closed. Sad case. So let's try not to scream so much, hey? We're not stranded. We're going to be okay.
In Oslo, in the winter months, the guttering which edges the roofs of the shops and houses often overflows and drips. At night, and sometimes in the day, the temperature is so low it causes the drips to freeze and create huge icicles which then hang above the pavements, like swords of Damocles over the people of Oslo as they walk to work or go to school. It's the responsibility of the owners of the building to do a risk assessment and, if necessary, to put out barriers to stop people walking underneath and getting skewered should an icicle fall. Often these barriers are nothing more than a couple of crates and bits of hazard tape tied between them, but it requires the pedestrians to step past them and onto the road. In all my time in Oslo, I've never heard of anyone getting skewered by a falling icicle. But I have heard of many people being knocked over by a truck as they've navigated one of these safety barriers. Right, well, this is a first. I'm on Storgata, and I want to begin by observing that it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's very cold and very dark, and this case is way outside my jurisdiction. If the body had been found in the water or on a boat or out at sea, then I'd be happy to lend the matter my considerable investigative talents. But it seems that there are city detectives tied up on other cases, and I was stupid enough to answer my phone because I don't sleep anymore, because I have a baby, and even on the days when my baby is staying over with my mother to give me a chance to catch up on sleep, I still don't sleep, and I answer the telephone in the early hours of the morning, and this is something I should definitely stop doing. Okay, that was quite a long sentence.
Could someone get me something hot to drink?
So, I'm looking at the body of a woman, perhaps around 50, quite smartly dressed. The coat is good quality, nice boots. She appears to have been struck at the base of the neck by a falling icicle, which, if I look up, was one of many others overhanging the building, quite precariously, actually. I might step back.
Could someone get me that weather guy who can tell me about the temperatures in the last couple of hours?
Part of the icicle is still protruding from her body. Part of it has broken off and is lying to the side of her. The cigarette she was smoking is still between her fingers. There is little blood because it's so cold, but it's a silly, horrible accident. If indeed it was an accident. I've always been a sucker for stories where the murder weapon disappears after being used. My favourite example from fiction is where a philandering husband is bludgeoned to death with a frozen leg of lamb in Roald Dahl's story Lamb to the Slaughter. The lamb is then roasted and fed to the investigating officer. Frankly, on a cold day like today, I'd be happy to be fooled that way. And there's a great Edgar Wallace story where the villain freezes snake venom into darts. I also remember one Sunday morning as a child watching the film Charlie Chan's Secret on television, when the heir to a fortune is killed during a séance by an ice bullet, which is fired from a customised cigar case and leaves no trace. So the child in me was trying a bit too hard to find an elaborate murder by ice story in this case. And this was probably what had me standing on the small platform of a cherry picker at 5 a.m.
Can I position the platform myself from up here? Do these controls... Whoa. Okay, yeah. That's got me nearer.
Right, so I'm looking at the build-up of ice, and it looks pretty solid to me. I find it hard to believe that a single icicle from the thickest part in the middle would be the only one to drop. Surely a bunch of them would have come down together. I also noticed that there's a skylight right above, and the snow around it has been disturbed recently, so someone could have potentially leaned out and broken the icicle off. Okay, it's quite high. I'm coming down.
Remind me which button I have to press to get me back to the pavement?
That part of the street was mainly shops at street level, but residential apartments above. The apartment with the skylight had been empty all night as the owners were away for the weekend. There was no sign of forced entry, and the disturbed snow must just have been a gust of wind. One of the apartments was rented by the victim herself. She was single, 53, and she worked for the Oslo Kommune in the roads department. I instinctively had one or two murderous thoughts about her, as the city's roads had been in a permanent state of repair for the last 3 years, and there seemed no end to it. Despite this, or perhaps because, it created a beleaguered camaraderie in the council. She was well liked in the department, and her colleagues and all those who lived in her home building were shocked at the news of her death. The only misdemeanour in the woman's past was that she'd apparently signed the rental agreement claiming she didn't smoke. That was about as close to criminality as this woman got. Until she was murdered, of course.
All right, possibly murdered. Settle down. I know you've all written this case off, but I don't want to close the file on it yet. And it's not because I like Agatha Christie. Something about this one isn't right to me. So, Michael, I want you to keep digging into the victim's life while I've got to go and pick up my son from the childminder. But I'm straight back on it after that. OK, that's it, everyone. Thank you.
China has the Great Wall, Italy has the Renaissance, Greece has the birth of civilization, and Norway has flexible working legislation. And I'm grateful for it, I am. But I also know that I'm not taking full advantage, and I've been told on more than one occasion by Human Resources that I'd got months of leave and I should stop coming in. Or at the very least decide if I was coming in or not, as it was very confusing in terms of staffing and payroll. And so I tried to strike a healthy balance, but it was impossible to switch off. And even as I would push little Tour around the streets in his pushchair to get us both some fresh air, I found many of our walks swung by crime scenes.
So, behind that barrier is where the victim was found, with a wound in her neck. And right up there is where the icicle supposedly fell. But only one of them. And this is the issue. There was no one in the room nearby who could reach out of the window and dislodge it, but the snow was disturbed. The temperature on the night in question was too low for a sudden thawing of anything, let alone the biggest icicle. So you see why it's niggling me.
Where are you pointing? Oh, you want to go over the street to the toy shop. Yes, there's a lovely squashy kitten in the window. Would you like the kitten? Oh, hang on a minute. I didn't think of the windows opposite. Of course. Aside from her colleagues at the council, I'd broken the bad news to the only person we could find with whom the woman had had any significant relationship. She'd outlived her parents and had no siblings, but there was an ex-husband living in London. A short-lived marriage, apparently. They'd met in a school where she was a teacher for a short time. She'd taught science and he taught English, but then a few months later there had been some issue at the school. He was a bit hazy about it, but it seems they both lost interest in teaching and soon after lost interest in each other. He joined a translation service in London, and she went into the council and ended up trying to fix the roads. He was sad about her death, of course, but he hadn't had any contact with her since the divorce, and that was over 6 years ago. So he wasn't distraught, and he certainly had an alibi. Even so, I'd visited the school where they'd taught and asked to have a look through the records. After some sighing, the secretary dug out the personnel files, convinced that I wouldn't find anything. The only thing of note, in her recollection of the teacher, was that she'd once confiscated an air rifle from a student, and it had caused a degree of fuss with the boy, who'd threatened her. And yes, it seemed the boy still lived in central Oslo.
We're just going up in this lift to the top floor, Bunny. I want to talk to the person who lives in the apartment opposite where the icicles fell. Then we'll go to the toy shop.
Or to the police station, not sure yet.
OK, here we are.
Hello? Could I have a word? This is the Oslo police.
It was all playing out in my head. The icicle had been shot down by an air rifle on the opposite side of the street, and the perpetrator was the disgruntled ex-student of the teacher who'd never forgiven her for getting him expelled. And as the door flew open and I was confronted by a man in his 20s, unshaven and with the wildness of someone who hasn't slept in a week, it occurred to me that I should have brought backup with me. Probably armed backup. And certainly not a baby.
OK, calm down. I'm sure we can sort this out. Perhaps if we just have a cup of coffee, then you can tell me all about it. And I see you've got a cat. That's sweet. Would you let my baby see your cat? He loves animals.
And I diffused the situation with domesticity. And the man relaxed, and I relaxed, and as my baby played with the cat, it clicked. The disturbed snow, the random icicle falling. I asked the man if his cat liked exploring the rooftops, and he confirmed that it was a bit of an issue. The man wasn't sleeping well because of it, but the cat never got far, and he often saw it from his window on the opposite roof, near where the poor woman was killed. And at that, the man stopped, and I saw on his face the sudden registering of the possibility that his own cat had accidentally dislodged the icicle which caused the death he'd been reading about. I looked at the cat rolling around on the floor, making my little boy giggle, and thought no one benefited from knowing this information. Nothing would be gained. So I told him no. It was probably just a freak thaw. Often happens in Oslo. No big mystery.
I think Charlie Chan would have said the same.
It struck me that during the last year or so, I'd had plenty of dead bodies to investigate, but no actual murder. There'd been suicides and accidents and mishaps and tragedies, but nothing with any malicious intent. Perhaps that was why, as a single woman, I was able to bring a baby into the world. I'd stopped becoming quite so appalled at man's inhumanity to man, and so I'd decided to buy into the whole human project and add to its number. It's okay, little Tour. It's just a shot in the leg which will keep you strong and healthy. After this, you'll be protected against diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, polio, something with a Latin name which I can't pronounce but which sounds horrible, and I'm glad you won't get it. So be brave. It'll be worth it in the long run. And the whole team had been feeling differently too, I think. The humour in the office wasn't quite so bleak. The drinking wasn't quite so heavy. Someone even brought me coffee once, and I think he was as surprised as I was. But then, on one bright January morning, a call came through from the rangers at Frogner Park. As I was still on sabbatical from the boat patrol, I took a squad car west to where the park sits, flanked by pretty cafes and smoothie bars and nice houses. It's a part of town where it'd be great to bring up a child. And in these new, optimistic times, I'd even allowed myself a secret look at the ridiculous house prices. When I got to the park, however, much of my enthusiasm for the area drained away.
Could you stand back, please? I need you to clear the area. Mikkel, I want you to close off the whole park, not just the sculpture area. There are gates at all exits, and I want an officer on each of them.
Oh, man, this is horrible. Outside of Norway, Gustav Vigeland is perhaps best known as the designer of the Nobel Peace Prize medal. The Peace Museum is by the docks, in fact, and if you were so minded, you could go in and see some of the people who've been honoured. The medal has a picture of Nobel on the front, and on the back are 3 men, kind of dancing, and it represents the fraternal bond of humanity. But here in Oslo, Vigeland is well loved as the artist behind the 600 figures in bronze and granite in Frogner Park. I used to enjoy walking around here when I was a student. I had my lunch under the trees. I kissed someone by the gates. I was sick in the fountain, and I think it's because Vigeland represented all of life here in his sculptures. At the highest point of the park is a monolith consisting of 121 human figures struggling together, climbing together, rejoicing together to a height of 15 metres. It's a beautiful object, carved from a single stone and a testament to the human spirit. Not that day, though, for discovered at the bottom of the monolith, naked and twisted, were 3 men, eyes wide, heads broken, and very, very dead.
According to the pathologist, the cause of death is conine poisoning. Now, from the angle and arrangement of the bodies, it looks as if the three had been, for some reason, on top of the monument, and then they'd fallen down off it. It's what the physical injuries suggest. So we'll need to know how they got up there, who put them up there, and when. And if we're feeling strong, we'll need to know why.
It was conine which supposedly killed Socrates. It comes from spotted or poison hemlock, which is a ferny leafed weed that can grow a couple of metres tall, has purple spots on the leaves and a small white flower. When crushed or made into tea, the smell has been variously described as a bit like parsnip or a mouse, though I don't know if I'd recognise the smell of a mouse. The plant is mostly found in hotter countries like Australia or around the Mediterranean, but it has never, as far as I know, been found in Norway. I say, as far as I know. I didn't know any of this, so I got back on my boat and took a trip to Hovedøya, which is where a professor of biosciences was doing a field trip with his students. Hovedøya is rich in chalk-like soil, and the island was considered to be Norway's most biodiverse. If hemlock was anywhere, it'd be there.
Hey, Professor! How about this plant? It's kind of a fern, isn't it? And it smells a bit mousy. And a bit parsnippy. Perhaps it is a parsnip. What? Okay, I shouldn't have ripped it out of the ground. Oh, that was bad of me. Sorry.
Seems it's illegal to take plants. Didn't know that. Bit embarrassing.
Should I push it back in the ground, Professor? No, just leave it. Right.
We concluded, the professor and I, but mostly the professor, that there probably wasn't any hemlock on the island, and that either the conine was derived from something else or it was brought into the country in an airtight bag and driven up from Greece or somewhere. So on the poison front, I wasn't able to go back to the office with any solid leads. But the day wasn't a write-off, because when I got back in the boat, I was informed that the 3 victims had been identified. They were brothers. The youngest was 31, the middle one 33, and the oldest was 36. And they worked together. They ran a successful restaurant in the southwest of the city. They used their extensive experience travelling to influence their cooking, and were, before they ended up at the foot of the Vigeland monolith, considered to be pretty hot stuff in the culinary world.
So, what kind of restaurant do you think it was, Mikael? Because I've got a theory already. You want to hear it? Well, I'm going to tell you anyway. I bet it was one of those new contemporary Nordic restaurants that neither of us will be able to afford until we sell a kidney. And then we'll have it served back up to us on a bed of berries, which have been foraged according to the seasons. Am I right? I hear they're incredible. They're leading the world, and you have a great time, as long as you can get over the suspicion that you're paying 1,000 kroner for a plate of grass. That's all well and good, of course, but the thing about those places is that they suck the life out of the more traditional restaurants nearby. That's my conspiracy straight off the bat. We look for murderous chefs whose businesses have closed down. Oh, look, I'm getting a call through. Can we dock further up the coast?
It was the childminder. Little Tur had a fever and had been sick and was whimpering for his mum. Most likely this was due to the vaccinations he'd had in the morning, but the childminder didn't know the difference between a post-injection temperature or a dangerous adverse reaction. So she called in a panic. I know, little man. It's miserable, isn't it? But it's just the injections you had this morning, and they're giving you a tiny bit of diphtheria,
tetanus, whooping cough, polio, and God only knows what else. And that would make anyone grumpy. Of course it would. Shh, 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 now. I'll give you something to take the pain away and help you sleep.
He soon went off, and I lay with him, but once I was lying down, I didn't feel like getting up again. Even when Mikkel called to say that they had questioned the owners of the other restaurants in the area in order to test my theory about jealousy and ambition in the trade, and I should come down to the station to hear the inevitable result, I didn't have the energy to hear about man's inhumanity to man, so told him to just tell me over the phone. Seems the inevitable result was that I was quite wrong. All of the brothers' competitors had both profited from the proximity of a famous restaurant. They all had alibis, and all of them were devastated that 3 of their own had died. So with that theory out the window, I took some of Tor's infant medication and went to sleep.
Come on, come on.
Ah, Mikkel, about time. Listen. What?
I don't know. 3 in the morning? Who cares? I've thought of something. At the victim's parents' house...
Are you listening?
Okay. At the parents' house, the father mentioned something about how the 3 boys were always clear in mind and body, and this was because they were firm believers that respect for nature would give them all they needed to stay healthy in life. I want you to go back and check. Not now, no, in the morning. I want you to go back and check to see if this was something the parents were weird about too, because I suspect they didn't get their boys vaccinated. I'm not sleep-deprived, Mikkel, or rather, yes, I am, but I'm also very clear-headed, and also a mother, so do as you're told.
There are 3 countries in the world where polio is still common: Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. I saw it on a poster in the morning when I was taking Tur to the doctors. The 3 brothers had visited Nigeria the previous year. In fact, Kalishi, a take on the dried meat local to the region, had featured on their most recent menu. But they'd also gone into some of the most remote parts of the country and, as the pathologist confirmed to me later that day, had become infected with polio. I think the brothers must have discovered this at some point on their return. Polio apparently feels a lot like flu in the early stages, and they won't have thought much of it. But chefs with a fatal and highly infectious disease running a restaurant, well, I guess they must have played it out in their heads, and they'd have had to bear what would inevitably follow: a health scare, diners contacted and quarantined, panic, catastrophic loss of reputation, business failing, then health failing too. And so they ended it before living through it. On Vigeland's monument, the circle of life, from the bottom to the heights and to the bottom again. The eternal return.
Yes, it's sad, but it's also not so bleak, little one. At least I don't have to chase a serial killer. And it's another case you've helped me solve. So perhaps we're a good team, huh? Perhaps there's a way to make this work. What do you think? Shall I give you a little deerstalker? A magnifying glass? Or do you want me to take you out on the boat so you can join the boat patrol like your mum? Oh, okay. Okay, right. Why don't I learn how to shut up? Seriously, you were fast asleep, and I got slushy, and now... Okay. Shh. Tur, please, for Mummy. I've got to be up early. I need to be more with it at work, Tur. I need to sleep. Shh.
All Human Life by Nick Walker was read by Nicola Walker and produced by Jeremy Osborne. It was a Sweet Talk production.